Hi guys, it's your boy Pavi. I hope you're all keeping well, and it's time for me to do another video. It's been a couple of months, but I really wanted to do a quick video. They're never really quick, but I'm going to say a quick video on why I said Yannick Sinner winning Rome, his sixth consecutive Masters, is now making a mockery of the sport of tennis. Now, I've kind of taken it upon me to kind of be a voice against corruption in tennis, not just Yannick Sinner, but just corruption and unfairness in tennis, double standards. I've followed the sport closely for 20 years. I play a lot of tennis. I helped run a tennis club for over coming up to 20 years now. I know a lot of the tennis media. I'm friends with a lot of the tennis media. I know a lot of professional tennis players. I'm also friends with them. So I feel that I have got just as good qualification to speak about something that I'm passionate about, which is tennis, as anyone else from Tennis Channel, your Chris Eubanks, your Andy Roddicks, your John Wertheims, anyone who it may be. Yes, a lot of those have got good tennis careers, apart from John Wertheim, but a lot of them are professional tennis players, so they are qualified to speak. But I feel that I'm also qualified to speak about a subject that I feel that I'm very, very passionate about. And looking in from the outside for the last 20 years, I just feel that the tennis mainstream media are not telling you what's really happening in tennis. Now, we're going to go back really to kind of the start of this year, and then I'm going to dwell back a little bit because a lot of this is interlinked. A lot of it goes back 3, 4, 5 years. And obviously, I'm talking about this whole Yannick Sinner situation and how I feel that tennis have done the biggest whitewashing and propaganda exercise that there has ever been in professional sport. And we'll look at the links between Rolex and Nike and the power and the what I feel is the corruption in tennis, because it seems to me that if you've got power and influence and are sponsored by some of the big hitters in tennis, it means that you are also afforded protection from the mainstream media and also promotion. And mainstream media is so important because they are a key channel. So a lot of tennis fans will tune into mainstream media and they will believe whatever they're told or whatever slant they're given and whatever context they're given. And media are very, very clever because they can't lie, otherwise they'll be sued. But what they can do is they can omit information. They can not ask difficult questions. They can ask easy questions. So all of this is part of manipulation and context, and that builds a viewer's opinion and perception on something. And this is the reason why I think a lot of people still think, well, we're not 100% sure about Yannick Sinner, but the media are kind of running with it and saying he's just a phenomenal player, so we're going to run with that too. And then you've got someone like me who has got a platform that will say, hang on, this isn't what's really happening. And then you'll get the likes of, in the last couple of years, I've had people like Andy Roddick, Martina Navratilova, Chris Eubanks call me out, which is, if they weren't scared about that, why are these people with huge platforms calling me out? Because they don't want people's opinions to be swayed. They want to promote everything as it is. So we're going to go back to kind of the start of the year, where we'll go back to the Australian Open and Novak Djokovic, 38-year-old. He's obviously 39 today, but 30-year-old beat Yannick Sinner in one of the most stunning performances of Novak Djokovic's career. He beat Yannick Sinner in the semi-final. It was a brutal final, 4 hour long final, 5 set final, really semi-final, sorry, really, really good match. And Novak Djokovic beat him. And Yannick Sinner, that's the only um, one of the major matches, when I say majors, masters, or slams, that he's lost this year to date. Now, Yannick Sinner then went on to Qatar, and then he lost to Jakub Mensik. So now there was a few alarm bells ringing. And in the post-match interview, Yannick Sinner said, yes, I've lost to Djokovic. Yes, I've lost to Mensik, but I know exactly what to do. I'm not worried, and everything is going to be okay. So going into the next Masters, and having remembered that Yannick Sinner had won Paris, which was the last Masters of 2025, Yannick Sinner then goes on to win Indian Wells pretty much at a canter. He then goes on to win Miami pretty much at a canter. At this point, some of the media and even Carlos Alcaraz said, tennis is such a grueling sport these days, mentally and physically, that a lot of people would say, you know what, we're going to have a bit of a break. It's a different continent. we're going to miss Monaco. It's, very, very Monte Carlo, very quick after Miami. And Carlos Alcaraz was actually saying, oh, he's quite surprised that Yannick Sinner is playing that, because he's just played Indian Wells, a 2-week tournament, Miami, a 2-week tournament. He's now going on to Monte Carlo. Yannick Sinner plays Monte Carlo and wins at Alcantara, beating Carlos Alcaraz very, very comfortably. First time ever on clay, and wins. That's now 3 consecutive Masters titles on the road. 4 if you include Paris from last year. So 3 for this season and 4 if you include Paris. He then goes on to then play Madrid, and he then goes on to win Madrid pretty much at Alcantara. And then there was a few people saying, oh, we're not sure, he's really, really tired. But no, he then goes on to Rome and wins Rome also at Alcantara, apart from a little glitch in the Medvedev game, and we'll talk about that later. But he goes on to win Rome. So he's won 6 Masters consecutively. Nobody in the history of tennis has ever won 6 consecutive Masters. This is a guy who has struggled physically, mentally in the past, and is now winning 6 Masters on the trot. So for me, as a citizen journalist or as a fan or whoever you want to call me, this has nothing to do with me being a Djokovic fan or anything like that. This is just for the fairness of tennis. I'm asking a lot of questions here. I want to ask a lot of questions. I want to know, is he still being drug tested? Because since the ITIA took over, they will no longer tell us which players they are drug tested, who are being tested. And not a single one of the media have asked Yannick Sinner to say, you failed to drug test in 2024. Can you confirm if you are being drug tested? Now, none of the media are asking questions. Now, if you go back to 2022 and Novak Djokovic, when they weren't sure if he'd taken the vaccine or not, or what days he took it, and whether he'd taken it and had infected other people when he shouldn't have been. He should have been in lockdown. They were ringing Serbia hospitals. It was constant. They were investigating every single micro detail. They were looking at his social media. Where was he on this day? What was he doing on that day? Asking him questions directly, just building it. All of the tennis crew. And you'll all remember, your Mark Petchys, your Martina Navratilova, your Andy Roddick's, all the same people that are protecting Yannick Sinner were asking those questions that none of them are asking now. Okay, so that is a huge red flag. So you've got to ask, why are these people not asking those questions? Another really important question, Yannick Sinner, after he won Rome, said, I have to pay testament to Umberto Ferreira. Thank you for keeping me in shape. This is the same Umberto Ferreira that Yannick Sinner had said was at fault. This was the reason he got contaminated. Now, this is the story that they provided. Yannick Sinner said that Umberto Ferreira was carrying with him a product for personal use, for chronic personal use, which to this day we still don't know. And he decided that he would give it to his physio at the time, Giacomo Noldi, because Noldi didn't know how to deal with a cut. So you've got the number 1 player that's got probably the number 1 fitness trainer in the world, the number 1 physio in the world. He's got a phenomenal team. And his physio doesn't know how to deal with a cut. Now, the story is even funny because the cut apparently came from an open scalpel. So you're paying this physio thousands of pounds to look after you, make sure that you can deal with cuts, bruises, anything that a physio will do to. He's got little pinky finger cut and he doesn't know how to deal with it. So Umberto Ferreira said, well, I tell you what, I've got this really magic cream. I know that it's got a banned substance in it, and I know that you're massaging Yannick Sinner every single day, and he's apparently got psoriasis, but you can take it from my unit, and just but let's not tell anyone, and let's hope everything will be okay, because we've got to get your pinky finger back and better. So then Giacomo Noldi's testimony was that he wasn't sure if he couldn't remember if he washed his hands and he didn't take any protective gloves because he was a bit tired from jet lag. So, a young fit guy who's top physio, who's been a top physio in many of the sports teams before Yannick Sinner, was a bit tired with jet lag. So he didn't know if he remembered whether he washed his hands on an open wound. You were rubbing something into the number 1 player in the tennis hall with an open wound. So that is the story. And Yannick Sinner's story was, yes, it was, it was negligence. What was Umberto Ferreira doing with it? Umberto Ferreira with it had it in Miami. He shouldn't have even had it in Miami. It was a controlled substance. So in the US, at the customs, you have to declare if you have a controlled substance, and you have to show them proof of your prescription, and then that prescription can only be used for that person who's got prescribed for. Guacamole didn't have a prescription for that, so he wasn't even allowed to have that product. Now this is Umberto Ferreira, who apparently is very, very strict. Attention to detail is amazing, but he was carrying with him a banned substance. Okay, so this is the story that they provided, and Yannick Sinner then fired Umberto Ferreira and said he wanted a little bit of clean air and he doesn't trust that person again, and he's not going to work with him or Guacamole ever again. Now we go back to July, and all of a sudden, after Yannick Sinner had won Wimbledon with apparently no fitness trainer or physio, or was Umberto Ferreira working with him, and he didn't announce it, he formally announced that he was bringing Umberto Ferreira back into his team. Now, this is a guy that has just made a huge error that could have cost you a 4-year ban. Let's not beat around the bush here. Stefano Battaglino, who is a lower ranked Italian player, had a very, very small trace of clostebol. He also provided the very same excuse that it was transferred to him via a massage from a physio. But the difference being was that this physio wasn't on his paybook. Yannick Sinner had Guacamole on his paybook. So in effect, he was an employee. Yannick Sinner was his boss. So are we not always told to do what your boss tells us? Don't know. But the Stefano Blanatino case, it was an ATP physio, and he or she didn't want to get involved. They weren't able to track them down. And the ITIA and the Court Arbitration of Sport both did not believe his story, and he was banned for 4 years. Check out the case if you're not familiar with it. So where are the questions from the media now? Instead of saying, "Oh, he's got an amazing forehand, he's got amazing stamina, he's improved so much, he's got every asset of the game," why are they not asking, how did you feel confident enough to bring back Umberto Ferreira into the team? How has Umberto Ferreira increased your endurance, your strength, your power? What can he do? Because we all know he's a trained pharmacist, so we know that he's very, very skilled in medicines. That's what he's done. He used to own his own pharmacy, of course. But none of the media are asking for that. And all we've had in the last couple of months is Yannick Sinner is amazing. Look, he's with kids. He's so popular. Everyone loves him. This is a whitewashing exercise that I have never, ever seen before. And people say to me, "Well, you're obsessed. You keep talking about Sinner." No, I'm asking questions about Sinner, that how he's performing so well, that no one else has ever done this. No modern tennis player has won 5 consecutive Masters in the same season, 6 consecutive on the trot. And he's done so without us knowing if he's still being drug tested or not. Now, I have suspicions that he is not being drug tested, because the ITIA went through a lot of grief. They'd cleared Yannick Sinner. It was kept quiet for 5 months. I didn't even think this was supposed to be out in public. WADA appealed that decision. It's the only case that WADA have appealed in tennis ever. And they would only do so, the whole of the anti-doping program was with the ITIA in 2022. WADA simply oversee any cases, and they would only pick up those cases that they feel there is a glaring error. Yannick Sinner was one of them. Now, the other thing with WADA is they decided that they had enough evidence to take the court to the Court Arbitration of Sport, which they did. The Court Arbitration of Sport looked to their evidence and said, "Yes, you've got a case. We will decide this. We're an independent arbitrator." And they set a date. They set a date for the 16th of April. But Yannick Sinner then decided that he was able to negotiate with WADA. But we weren't privy to any of that negotiations. That's never happened before. WADA have said, "We're appealing it." They're going to CAS. That's it. That should be the meta end. It's then for the Court Arbitration of Sport to then adjudicate. But it never got to that matter. So Yannick Sinner and his solicitors, and with WADA, and we don't know if any financial incentives were asked, if there was any other pressure that was put on. But they suddenly decided to come up with a settlement which none of the public were privy to. And no other player, in my understanding, has ever done this, where they've negotiated directly with WADA, who have intervened in ITIA case, and they came with a convenient 3-month ban, but a ban that made sure that he didn't miss a single Grand Slam. And it was actually 84 days, 6 days less than 3 months. So he was back in time for the Rome Masters. And yet the media still don't ask any questions. And you've got to ask why. And, I'll tell you some of the reasons why. Rolex is one of Yannick Sinner's primary sponsors. They are also the ATP's primary sponsors. Okay, make of that what you will. Nike is one of the biggest supporters of the Grand Slam. They have many bespoke material, kind of clothing, merchandise that they work with very, very closely with the Grand Slams. They're in very, very deep partnership with them. Yannick Sinner is Nike's #1 most invested in player when they paid $158 million in 2022. This is before Yannick Sinner had won anything of note. And they signed him on a 10-year deal. So all of these people are in play. Now, the ITIA is funded solely by tennis, including the Grand Slams and the ATP. So what happens if one of their main player is out for 4 years, like as in Stefano Battaclino? It means that they've lost a lot of money. It means they've lost a lot of investment money. But none of the media seem to want to ask for this. They want to move away. And at the same time, they want to make me look toxic for asking questions. Oh, look at him. He's just an idiot. He's obsessed with Novak Djokovic, being ending with the most slams. He's worried about all the records breaking. If I was worried about that, Carlos Alcaraz has 7 slams. Yannick Sinner has 4. Carlos Alcaraz is younger than Yannick Sinner. So if anything, I would actually say I'm supporting Sinner. So Alcaraz will not get to 24 because he's got 3 more slams than him, and he's also a year younger than Yannick Sinner. So that makes completely no sense. In fact, the fact that I support Djokovic has got absolutely nothing to do with the Yannick Sinner case. I've been looking at corruption in tennis for 20 years now, and this for me is one of the biggest cases that's out there. The way that he is able to continue, but not just continue, treated like a hero. So after an anti-doping ban, he has a meeting with the Pope. The Pope. This is one of the most difficult people to have a meeting with from anyone in the world. But Yannick Sinner managed to do that. He's then singing with one of the Italian top singers. He's then on every billboard. He's on every advert, the promotion. And you have to think, imagine if this was Novak Djokovic who failed 2 drug tests. Do you think the media would be lenient on him? And if you do, you're being very, very naive, or you're not telling the truth. Now, a lot of the tennis fans are Federer fans, Federer and Nadal fans, and a lot of them won't say anything to Yannick Sinner because they hate Djokovic so much. They have deep scars that they just want anyone but Djokovic to have all the records, and ultimately the main record, which is the most Grand Slams. They don't want Djokovic to have that. They want anyone, even if someone who's got huge red flags with his performance, they don't care. Okay, so this is why, a lot of them say, oh, it's just the Djokovic fans. It's not the Djokovic fans. Bjorn Borg, he is a Grand Slam winner, one of the most respected guys in tennis, and he keeps himself very, very private. But on this matter, he's shouted up. He's like, he failed 2 separate tests 8 days apart. The second test actually showed a slightly higher reading than the one 8 days ago. That's unusual. He said there's so many fitness trainers in the world. Yannick Sinner is one of the most well-paid athletes in the world. He could have picked any single fitness trainer, but he decided to go back to the same one that nearly cost his career. He said it's strange. Roger Federer was one of the first people, and he's a huge advocate. I'm not a big fan of Roger Federer because I also think he was given privileges. But one thing I'm confident of is that he didn't take drugs, because I followed his career on and off court, and I knew many, many times that Federer spoke up against dopers in the sport and said he wants more testing, he wants more sanctions. Just days after it was made public to us in August 2024, Federer was one of the very first people and said there's a lot of questions here. And one of my questions is how on earth was Yannick Sinner allowed to keep on playing during the whole of the investigations for 5 months? No one's ever answered that question, and none of the journalists are pushing for those questions. So you've obviously got Nick Kyrgios, who will take straight. He's someone who's not intimidated by anyone. this is Nick Kyrgios, and he called it straight, and he said that whole story is BS. And he has said time and time again he's going to keep speaking up about it because it is wrong. Novak Djokovic, he's a diplomat and he's a member of, was the member of the PTPA at the time, so he has to kind of take a little bit of a neutral stance. But then he also said, and Piers Morgan's uncovered, show that a lot of the people that he's spoken in the locker room weren't happy with what happened, and he just said, this is going to stay with Yannick Sinner for the rest of his career, and the fact that he only got 3 months has angered a lot of people. But a lot of the tennis players, they don't want to upset the apple cart. They have to see these people. They don't know the power that these people have got and if it can impact their tennis career. So a lot of them kind of go with it. But if you read the kind of body language of things and the way that their things go, there's not many players that are happy. And if Yannick Sinner keeps on winning, more and more people will start answering questions that he will have to ask. He will have to ask. He can't keep winning and get avoided these questions. So in Rome, he actually brought it up himself, where he was asked, how do you feel a year on after coming from your ban? And Yannick Sinner's response was, well, I didn't do anything wrong, he said. He didn't do anything wrong. It was due to the mistakes of others. So Yannick Sinner didn't do anything wrong. He failed 2 doping tests. He knew he failed these doping tests in March 2024. Apparently, he was told at the end of April 2024. He sat with that information. We've seen Marie Sharapova, Dan Evans, when they failed drug tests, they went straight and did a press conference and said, this is what's happened. We're going to be upfront and honest with you. Yannick Sinner didn't do that. No, Yannick Sinner came up with a story that he had a chronic hip injury, which means that he could be out of the game for a long time. He suddenly gets a bout of tonsillitis just before the Olympics. And we all know that the Olympics have a separate doping test mechanism, and they're very, very strict on all of their athletes. They get tested multiple times, is what they're reported. He decided that he didn't want to play in the Olympics because he had tonsillitis. His doctor told him tonsillitis. A few days later, he's boarding to go to Montreal to play in an ATP event. No one really questions that. So, these are what I'm doing. And when people say, oh, you hate Sinner, you're a hater, you're just a bully to him. No, I don't hate him. He seems a nice guy. A simple guy. He doesn't particularly. I'm not attracted by his brand of tennis or his personality. I think he is very robotic and is almost like a machine. But I don't hate him. But what I do hate is corruption in tennis. What I do hate is unfairness in tennis and double standards in tennis, and certain players getting away with it. And I will always use my platform. And I've had threats. I've had loads of stuff. People say, how do you deal with it? I get constant threats, constant abuse, constant, you don't even want to know what sort of stuff I get. But it doesn't stop me. That's in my DNA. I will always fight for what is right. I don't get intimidated by stuff, and I will, I will use my voice, my platform to try and get people to answer questions, to try and investigate what's really happening in the sport that I dearly love. So I'm going to continue doing that. But I feel at the moment, Yannick Sinner is making a